Ladies and gentlemen, as we begin our services here this morning, we would kindly ask everyone to please turn off or silence all electronic devices. Thank you.
Ma'ayan HaChayim, wellspring of life. We come together this morning, sharing our sorrow, to commemorate the life of Marv. We recall the blessings of his life. We thank God for all that was good and true in his life, and for the precious memories and moments that shall endure. Eternal God, his family and friends, bowed in grief, come together to acknowledge his life and his loss. Be gracious to those who mourn, O God, for they are in distress. Bless them with your compassion. Ease their burden of sorrow. Send them light and peace. For it is written, "Fear not, as I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will sustain you with my power." And let us all say, Amen. You've noticed that just before we started, we had our own private moment as if life outside of our bubble didn't exist. And we stood together with Greg and Diane, Daniel, Julie, she's here? Oh, okay. Randolph, Randy and Susan, Keith and Donna, and the grandchildren in the next row. Tell me who you are. Let's see. Jeremy. Okay. Tyler. Ryan. Oh, wait. Didn't you just identify? Oh, Ryan. Okay, sorry. All these good-looking guys with beards. Hard to... Joshua. Okay. Maya. No. Amina. Okay. Oh, okay. And Lena. Okay. And as I explained to them, and you will see as you look at them, there is a custom, thousands of years old, that the ribbon is torn on the left-hand side as a child mourns a parent. Every other relationship's on the right-hand side. We thought the heart was on the left, and that was a boost to the child who's mourning a parent. But you also will notice as you get closer to them afterwards that the ribbons are not cut all the way across. There's still a sense of tearing emotionally, but the part closest to the heart, where we thought the heart was, is intact, as are the memories and the moments and the love that still connects them with Marv and with each other. As fate would have it, I spoke with the family, a couple of the brothers, back in April when Marv died. At that point, Greg then got sick. Glad to know he's healthy, but that put off a potential ceremony at that time. So I'm sad but honored to be with you here today. Marv was predeceased by his father Abraham, mother Ada, and his brother Lionel. Now, he's going to be placed with his parents at the Crescent Memorial Park. Lyle is there, but nearby, not exactly contiguous. And that was also a time of loss that he felt and you felt as well. This has been a tough weekend. I understand. Yesterday was a ceremony for Virginia, also acknowledging Phyllis, who died just 2 weeks ago. And then you had, many of you, a commemoration of life lunch that acknowledged Virginia, Phyllis, and Marv. where I assume you told anecdotes and stories and those memories that still connect. I also want to add that Lionel had 3 children. Vicky, who is also deceased, Andrea, and Mallory. Either the 2 of you identifiable? Okay. Also, I want to acknowledge Marvin had a partner of 20 years, Barbara Langford, who also is deceased. And they had a very loving relationship. Barbara's daughter Merle and her 3 sons were very close to Marvin. And there's also a second daughter, Laura, who has a son and a daughter as well. He had a current partner, Elaine Barlow, and they were together around 7 years. Marvin was born in Philadelphia, grew up in Camden, went to Collingswood High School, and the obit that we'll be referring to in a bit included his academic achievements and degrees and professional work. And what is lovely to hear is that even though your mother and Marv were divorced, you all maintained a very close relationship to each other. Very adult, very mature, and a good role model for everyone else in your family to see. The boy said he was a great father, and as a result, they are close as brothers. I enjoyed in our Zoom that you each had nicknames for each other. It was kind of cute. You didn't want me to refer to those nicknames here, but I can acknowledge that they exist. One that sticks in mind, though, there's a cubby. He was of a generation that did not share emotions effusively, but remember he told them that he loved them. But they said more than telling us, he showed us he loved us. A huge Philadelphia sports fan, an athlete in his own youth, and played semi-pro baseball in South Philly. Now, I think I had the relationship right. His grandfather was one of the original Spas, a precursor to the NBA team in Philadelphia. His father. Okay, that makes more sense. Thank you. My father was a fan of the Spas. So that's why I try to make the link here. He loved the outdoors, loved to fish, and I'm sure you'll hear again, took the family to Maine every summer. I had a photographic memory. I was impressed to hear that he was fluent in Spanish and German, and even produced a journal article, perhaps more, in German itself. That's quite an accomplishment, and a feather in his cap. And a quote that was given to me from Rabbi Rosenblum, who was ill and not able to be here today, was from Dewey, who said he was the smartest guy she had ever seen. And reading the obituary and talking to you and what I've been learning, yeah, this was quite a guy, Renaissance guy who knew stuff and really loved to share it as well. I offer on his behalf a couple of specific prayers. The first is Psalm 23, unique not just to Jewish funerals, but to Christian ones as well. I will add a small selection, however, in Hebrew. Mizmor leDavid, Adonai ro'i lo echzar, benodesha yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yanachaleni. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. God has me lie down in green pastures, leading me beside the still waters. God guides me on paths of righteousness and revives my soul for the sake of God's glory. Though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Your staff and your rod do comfort me. You set a table in sight of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall abide in the house of the Lord forever. as you were first coming in and acknowledging and greeting each other, you're tinged with sadness, but also certain joy at seeing one another. I appreciated that wide spectrum of emotions that are present here today. Reflecting that sense of understanding, closure, but also the joys of life, I present now a text in English translation of the book of Ecclesiastes. For everything there is a season, a time for every experience under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to grieve and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to discard, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to keep silence and a time to speak. Indeed, it is a time to speak and to share, and I call on the four sons to come up as a group together, please.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, everybody, for coming. As the rabbi said, it hasn't been an easy weekend, but it's a weekend that we all need. We needed, and so he also mentioned how close all of us are, and I think that's a tribute to our parents. And even though they were only married about 20 years, most of those were really good years, and we're all pretty close. And we're going to share in a eulogy of Dad. I'll start, because I'm the biggest. Oh, no, I'm the oldest. Marvin Lewbart was born May 28, 1929 in Philadelphia. Over the course of the first 30 years of his life, he obtained 4 college degrees, a license to practice medicine, had married, and become father to the first of 4 sons. During the next few years, he became the first Mayo Clinic fellow to focus on steroid chemistry. He turned down a postdoctoral fellowship at none other than Cambridge University and spent 14 months studying and collaborating with Nobel laureate Professor Thaddeus Reichstein at the University of Basel in Switzerland. The rabbi already mentioned Juie's comment about Dad's intellect, and in my over 46 years as either a university student or a professor, I'm certain Dad is the smartest person I've ever met. I see Elaine nodding. She's been around longer than I have. Dad decided on Switzerland because he knew living on the European continent would provide more travel opportunities for him and Mom. Coincidentally, a month after we moved to Basel, the Berlin Wall was erected. That and other challenges didn't stop my parents, and in some cases me, from traveling to almost a dozen countries in Europe. Dad and Mom even went to Stuttgart, Germany in 1961 and purchased a brand new Mercedes-Benz sedan when there were no Mercedes dealers in the United States at all. Over the decades, the Lewbart family has maintained close ties to friends in Switzerland. Dad's last trip there was in 2017 at the age of 88 with Diane and me. Ada Wax, our mom, and Abraham, our pop-pop, emigrated to the United States from the Ukraine and Russia, respectively, in the early 1900s. Pop-pop was an accomplished athlete, as the rabbi mentioned, and by the time he was a teenager was a standout in both varsity basketball and football for Southern High in Philly. He was one of the original members of the Philadelphia Spas, or the Southern Hebrew Association, which later became the Philadelphia Warriors and ultimately the Philadelphia 76ers. Pop-Up was a close friend and teammate of renowned player and later Warriors manager Eddie Gottlieb, the namesake for today's NBA Rookie of the Year award. Following the string of time, one could say that Dad's father played basketball for the Philadelphia 76ers. My mom was an accomplished musician and vocalist who also worked as a typist and bookkeeper for the National Leather Goods Company in Philadelphia. My mom and Pop-Pop's first surviving child was born in 1926, a boy they named Lionel, and just a fantastic guy. I mean, we lost him way too young, but he's one of the best people ever. Sadly, over the years, my mom and had half a dozen miscarriages before Dad was born. My mom kept busy raising her two boys through the Depression years and singing at Christian weddings on weekends. Shortly after Dad was born, Pop-Pop's job moved the family from Camden to Baltimore, where they lived for a couple years. Then it was back to Camden in a row home at 29 Fairview Court. In 1938, the Lewbarts moved to Woodland, New Jersey. And I'll let Danny take it from here. Oh, here you go, Dan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't speak Hebrew, so that's okay. Want to thank everybody for coming this morning to honor my dad. Yeah. So I have to tell the story before I get to the eulogy. Julie and I have been married almost 20 years. And when I met Julie, she was a fourth-year medical student at the University of Pennsylvania. And I think because we got married so quickly after we met, we were at a family gathering, and Julie was talking to my dad. She loved to talk to him. They had a lot in common. They were both, Julie's an MD, PhD, just like my dad. And she was talking to my dad about some research she was doing at Penn involving zebrafish. Apparently, they're a good model for cardiac research, and Julie was in this lab. And after the party, Julie said, "You know, your dad is so smart." I said, "Why?" She goes, "I think he's the smartest person I've ever met." She said, "I was talking to him about the research I was doing on zebrafish, and I was explaining to him that they're such a good model. You can see, like, they're transparent. You can see their four-chambered hearts. And your dad said to me, wow, I would think zebrafish would have a two-chambered heart." And he was right, she said. He was well-read. He was well-accomplished. He was, as I've told people, that he set the bar so high that if any of us got even close, we were doing pretty well for ourselves. And those summers in Maine, 11 weeks every year, for me, ages 4 to 15, they were instrumental in, I think, keeping us brothers close. They were the good times, and we did have a lot of those. So let me get back to the eulogy. Dad attended the Woodland Grammar School from grades 3 through 8, and his working career started at a young age. While still a young boy, he hooked up with a teenager named John Schmidt, who had a Courier Post paper route. The Post published pink sheet horse racing numbers that were quite popular at the time. For 5 cents a week, Dad would ride on John's handlebars and shag papers flung by John that didn't get close enough to the door. At the end of the day, Dad's fingers would be pink from delivering all of the pink sheets. In 1942, John went into the service, and Dad, at the age 13, took over the paper route. He would collect the customer's bill on Saturdays, which was 18 cents a week or 3 cents a paper in the early years. If Dad was lucky, he'd get a quarter, and they'd tell him, keep the change. He kept the route all through high school and even into college, where he studied pharmacy at the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy and Science. But school didn't stop him from getting his papers delivered, and he hired a couple of kids to keep the route going. Dad delivered newspapers for over 10 years and had his own route for 9 years in both Woodland and West Collingswood. During his first year of college, Dad worked Sundays at a pharmacy called Arrow Cut Rate Drug at 15th and Market Street, just across from Suburban Station in Philadelphia. Dad also worked part-time at his father's laundry doing whatever needed to be done, and he took orders from people working at the laundry and sold them goods from Arrow Cut Rate. Dad started working at the Rappaport Pharmacy in 1948 while he was a second-year pharmacy student. By this time, his parents had moved to 1901 Park Boulevard in Camden, and he lived with them while going to school and working. Dad loved pharmacy school and chemistry in general. He graduated in 1951 and then enrolled in graduate school to do a master's degree in hospital pharmacy at PCP. It was about this time he met my mom. While in graduate school, he did an internship at the Jefferson Medical College Hospital Pharmacy and realized hospital pharmacy was not for him. So he switched programs and completed a Master's of Science in Pharmacy in 1953. But his time at the medical school and hospital intrigued him, so he applied to medical school in 1952 and was accepted by Jefferson in the winter of 1953. Now, my mom told the story that there was an application, I guess in Dad's apartment for medical school that his roommate was supposed to fill out. And my mom said, Marv, I can't remember the guy's name, but he decided not to fill it out. My mom pushed my dad, I guess, why don't you fill it out? So he did. I think that's a true story. He was accepted by Jefferson in the winter of 1953 to begin classes that fall. It was the only medical school he applied to in 1952. Dad met Dr. John Schneider. And I might add that my father, although he never was a practicing clinical medical doctor for the most part, he won the medicine prize at Jefferson Hospital, which is pretty amazing. In 1952, Dad met John Schneider while working at the hospital pharmacy at Jefferson. Dr. Schneider, who had his MD and PhD from the University of Chicago, would purchase steroids for his lab from the pharmacy. Dad took an interest, visited the Schneider lab. He started working with him during the summer of 1952 before medical school started. Just one brief little tidbit about my dad. And then the rabbi mentioned he was fluent in Spanish and German, which is true. And apparently when my dad was in high school at Collingswood High School, he was a class of 1947, the Spanish teacher would like to, take smoke breaks. So when the Spanish teacher left the room, my dad took over the class. Not only that, and there's an article on this, there was an exchange student from Mexico that came to Collingswood High School for, I think, a year, and he was paired with my father because my father could speak Spanish. Just one real quick, and I know I can be long-winded. I guess that's what attorneys do. But he played baseball at Collingswood High School, and he was a classmate of Ray Narleski. Ray Narleski later became a professional pitcher for the Cleveland Indians and was really an amazing pitcher. I think he was on one of their World Series teams. But Ray Narleski was a standout in high school. And I remember interviewing my dad not too long ago, and I said, Dad, what was it like having Ray Narleski pitch? Like, what was it like, playing behind him? My dad played first base. He said, I didn't have to do anything. He struck everybody out. So I'll let my, I'm not going to hide your stuff, Rand. So.
Yeah, don't take it this time. Good morning. I'm the third son and favorite now.
You're grabbing the rabbis.
Am I I'm sorry, Rabbi. Uh-oh, Dan, what'd you do? Oh, here, I got it.
Speak into the mic.
Okay. All right. When the rabbi brought up that we had nicknames, I had a few. And one was Panda from my mother, Star Child from Greg, and my dad used to call me Twerp. Now, twerp was a term of endearment. He was never mad at me when he called me twerp. He was always happy and, talked to me, but I like twerp.
And he has a twerp mark.
I have a twerp mark. Well, it's not actually a birthmark I call twerp because I guess I couldn't pronounce birth at the time. Birthmark, so it was twerp. All right. During medical school, Dad continued working as a pharmacist at night and on weekends. He was able to pay all his tuition with his job and still lived at home in Camden with his parents. While a medical student, Dad would also work with Dr. Schneider after class, and the two began a nearly 25-year collaboration. After graduating from medical school and marrying my mom the very next day, it was time for Dad to do an internship in order to become a licensed practice medicine. At the time of the residencies were not required, and many, if not most, physicians were not board certified. Dad's internship was at Lankenau Hospital in Philadelphia from 1957 to 1958. The time and energy of consuming internship did not keep Dad from his beloved steroid research. He even had his own lab at Lankenau. Here he was mostly isolating and synthesizing corticosteroids using paper chromatography. That's a tough one. Yeah. During this time period, he continued to collaborate with Dr. Snyder across town at Jefferson. Dad used to pay his intern mates for their urine, which he used to isolate steroids. In exchange, they covered his ER shifts. Next was off to the University of Minnesota in 1958 to officially begin his PhD work. Between 1959 and 1963, Dad and Mom had 4 sons and moved from Minneapolis to Rochester, Minnesota, to Basel, Switzerland, to Levittown, later Willingboro, New Jersey, where they raised their 4 boys. Starting in 1964, a family spent most of the summers in Maine fishing, hiking, swimming, and exploring nature. For over 15 years, Dad worked at Jefferson doing research and moonlighting in South Jersey independently owned pharmacies. Later, after Dr. Snyder retired, Dad began working as the company doctor for the Franklin Mint and also spent many years doing insurance physicals, which I did once in a while. My dad actually got me a job, and I would do physicals. And I got a good story.
Let me tell it.
You want to tell it?
Yeah.
Well, Greg is, all right. Go ahead.
So, before I tell the story about Randy, the collecting of the urine, my dad was so serious about this because it was, his research, and he loved doing it, that one of his classmates, Dad couldn't track. He needed to get his urine because it was every 24 hours, and he couldn't find this guy Joe. So someone said, "Yeah, Joe's getting a haircut over at Sal's." So my dad walked in. The student was getting his haircut. My dad brought the container in and put it underneath the, whatever cloth it was to get the urine. So Randy, this story, Randy was doing these physicals, and I don't think at the time he needed to be licensed, but for the bigger policies, they didn't just, take a urine sample and blood pressure. They wanted a blood sample. So Randy goes into this executive's office in Center City, Philadelphia, and he gets the needle out to take the guy's blood, and this is, I think this really happened like this. Apparently, Randy passed out from the blood, and so did the guy. They're both passed out.
Passed out.
Yeah.
So I had to get Greg, the next time was down in Atlantic City, and I had to take blood. There was no way I'm taking blood. So I bought Greg, who was at vet school at the time. He took the guy's blood with no problem. But there was a time, too, when my father did a physical, and he told the guy I need a sample. Well, the gentleman went upstairs.
I was there.
Yeah. Oh, you were there?
I was there.
The gentleman went upstairs, and it took 10, 15 minutes. And it came down, instead of urine, it was number 2.
Yeah.
So.
guy was so proud of himself, too, because he got it in the container.
Yeah. Let me continue. So he continued with his steroid research in the labs at Crozer-Chester Medical Center in Malvern, PA, and in Voorhees, New Jersey, where he retired at the age of 90 in 2019. My brother Keith, along with his son Tyler, have spent decades working in the steroid lab and learning from Dad. Just last week, Keith moved the last piece of equipment to North Carolina, where he will continue Dad's legacy and as a steroid chemist. And it's KJ's turn.
I just gave away my nickname. Yeah, so getting back to the insurance exam, I used to spend my weekends with my father when my parents got divorced, but I would spend every weekend with my dad, and I would go on some of these insurance physicals that he used to do, and whenever we went into the city, he always was packing. Like, he's like a cowboy, like Dr. Cowboy. So he always had his 38, and it was nice and shiny, and the guy told him where he bought it. He said, if you get in trouble, just flash that. That should take care of things. But he had no permits, nothing. He just, he's got his 38, and I just remember going into all those different places with him and spending a lot of time. We'd go to the movies every weekend. So that was back in the 70s. So I had a lot of fond memories. I would sleep in his little apartment that he had, and go to the lab with him even when I was just a little kid. And even Donna remembers going to his old lab in Chester. He just spent most of his time, and I have all his notebooks, and it doesn't matter whose birthday or whatever. There was always an entry with somebody's birthday on it. He was there. Like he was. That's what he loved to do, and that's where he spent a lot of his time. So, all right, I'm going to continue on here. Dad loved to travel, read especially biographies and history, listen to classical music, collect guns, target shoot, fish, and spend time with loved ones. He was an accomplished photographer who even made an in-home darkroom in the 60s for developing film and printing pictures. And I can remember that in Williamboro, he would basically turn our kitchen into a darkroom. Right, guys? And we were doing black and white, and he had all the chemicals in there, and remember the on-off timer that we used to do? Everything was kind of manual. Each had our own job, our own little station, So he really did love photography. I think this was mentioned, but he was fluent in Spanish and German and utilized these linguistic skills in his work and during his personal travel. He was a role model to his 4 boys and exceedingly proud of all of us and our families. After the 4 boys grew up, got jobs, married, and started their own families, for over 40 years we continued to reserve at least 1 week a year for our annual guys fishing trip. These adventures took us back to Maine many times, and also to Labrador, Quebec, British Columbia, Montana, Florida, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and even Alaska. These special times began as dad and son's only affairs, but that soon included grandsons, wives, and granddaughters. In his last few years, Dad was cared for by a number of dedicated people, including his partner, Elaine Barlow, caregiver Janet Young, and his sons and daughters-in-law. Danny religiously made weekly visits to see Dad, share a meal, watch the Phillies, send the rest of us videos, and Dad always saying, love you guys at the end of the videos. Danny also used to cut his hair, give him a shave, and my dad also loved to watch movies. He was a big movie guy, and he liked watching the old movies. And later on in life, and in his final days, he loved Shark Tank. It was very odd, but he really, really loved watching Shark Tank. And like, Dad, it's $3 an episode. You get it for free over there. But he didn't know how to do the remote, and he's like, I don't care. He just loved Shark Tank. So I always thought that was interesting. Well, Dad was exceedingly accomplished physician, chemist, scholar, photographer, and historian with a lightning quick wit. I guess maybe that's where we all got it from. He real quick wit and very sarcastic sometimes. He would say something to people, and he just basically, I don't know how to say it, but they didn't understand exactly what he was saying, but we understood his wit, so we knew what he was saying. So anyway, he was most proud of his 4 sons, their wives, and his 7 grandchildren. Like my brothers and their families, I will miss him too.
I found those reminiscences very, very, very authentic, but nothing can compare that group hug at the end. I want to also mention that Rappaport's pharmacy was my family's pharmacy. Right across from my elementary school of Solace Cohen, but my parents didn't move into the neighborhood until about end of 51, 52, so I don't think they overlapped. But we spent our lives and most of my pediatric needs out of the same pharmacy. I want to share with you a little bit of the obituary. Most interesting narrative that I've ever seen in all my decades in the rabbit of reading family obituaries. So it's the first big paragraph I'm going to share with you. It was a cold, wet winter in Cambridge, England, when scholar and scientist Francis Crick walked into the Eagle pub and shouted to no one in particular, "We have found the secret of life." After countless hours of intensive laboratory work, James D. Watson and Francis Crick had solved the mystery of life's blueprint anatomy. They had discovered the molecular structure of, I can't even pronounce it, but DNA. The date was February 28th, 1953. Coincidentally, this is February 2023. And Marvin Lewbart was completing a master's degree in hospital pharmacy and had been accepted to Jefferson Medical College in Philadelphia. Watson and Crick's Nobel Prize-winning work was published in the journal Nature later that year. Widely recognized as the top scientific journal in the world, and the same journal where young Marvin would publish his first paper 2 years later at the age of 26. He published 2 more first author Nature papers in 59 and 69, dozens of papers in other high-ranking chemistry journals, and 12 U.S. patents. So especially this picture of sitting in this pub in England is one that I've never seen before in an obituary. I now am honored to call on Jeremy and Tyler to come up. Jeremy and Tyler? Ryan and Tyler. Sorry.
Check, check. Hi, everyone. I'm Keith and Donna's youngest son, Ryan. I just wanted to thank everybody for coming out today. We really appreciate it, and also yesterday as well. I just wanted to say a few words about my grandfather, Dr. Marvin Lewbart, Grandpa, or as some of you may know, the Nivram. My grandfather was a very special person. Him and my grandmother, Virginia Lewbart, who most of you know from yesterday, they made a great team for their 4 boys, spouses, and grandkids. And they created a family bond that will stay with us forever. As most of you may know, my grandfather was kind of a man of few words at times. He was someone that led by his presence and actions and not as much by his words. He was one of the most intelligent people I've ever talked to, and he was an incredible teacher. He always taught us that you cannot learn anything if you're always talking, which is something that I kind of try to live by. He knew so much about everything. As I say, he knew everything about everything. His traditions and hobbies will forever live on throughout the Lewbart family. We love you forever, Grandpa. As he always used to say, transmitter off, receiver on.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tyler. I'm one of his grandsons. It's sort of surreal coming up here, talking about him. It's like he was always the guy that was he was just a machine. You never think anything like this could happen to him. He was just always on the go. He was always fishing, shooting, working at the lab. He was just a machine. He could just do anything. I spent a lot of time with him at the lab. That was a lot of fun. We talked a lot about school and if my grades are good enough, which of course they never were. But talked a lot about school, history, chemistry, guns, whatever it was. And it was just one of those things. You just sit there and just listen. You don't even say a word. Just listen to what he has to say. The best part was when he was stuck on the computer and he didn't know what to do. So he'd do this and he'd go like this, and I could tell he had no idea what he was doing. So he's sitting there, he turns around at me, he's like, Tyler, can you help me with this? So I go over and take 2 seconds, and he was amazed that I could just figure something out that quick. And he would go, well, I'll be damned. That's what he would always say. And he'd smile. And that for me was awesome because I got to teach something to one of the smartest guys in the world. So that was pretty cool for me. Also, I don't know if you guys know about his honesty, but he was the most honest person too. He was one of those guys, you go up to him and you say, how are you doing, Grandpa? And most people just go, I'm good, and that would be it. Sometimes you go up to him, how you doing? Not too good, not too good. And he'd tell you what was going on or whatever, and I could really appreciate that. Yeah, he was a great guy, and I could see he rubbed off on a lot of people in the family. Definitely one of the most influential men in my life. I hope I can accomplish a fraction of what he accomplished in his life. We love you, Grandpa.
Thank you, everybody.
We come now to a concluding prayer for the service here in the chapel. It is known as El Malei Rachamim. It translates as to God, the compassionate one. Even in moments of sadness, we turn to God for support. I ask those who are comfortable to please stand. El Malei Rachamim, Shochem Bamromim. Hamtsei Mnucha Nechona Tachat Kanfei Hashchina. B'malot Kedoshim Toharim, Kzoharakia Masirim. Nishmato Hayashar Shalach Lolamo. Began Eden Tehei B'nuchato. Ana Ba'al Harachamim Hastirehu B'seter Knapecha Laolamim. Utzror B'tzror Chayim Et Nishmato. Adonai hu nachalato, v'yanuach b'shalom amishkavo v'nomar. Amen. O God, exalted and full of compassion, grant perfect peace in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Marvin Lewbart, who has gone to his eternal home. Master of mercy, we beseech you, remember all the worthy and righteous deeds that he performed in the land of the living. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. The Lord is his portion. May he rest in the tranquility of shalom, of peace. And let us all say, Amen. You may be seated. The interment will take place at the Crescent Memorial Park in Pennsauken. And the family is asked that any potential memorial donations please be made to the Trout Unlimited or the North Carolina State College of Veterinary Medicine Turtle Research Rescue Team and Samaritan Hospice.